last thing on the disgraceful anti-Israel protests yesterday. This is what the Albanese government's helped to unleash with its own attacks on Israel. And now the government's actually considering effectively rewarding Hamas by recognising a Palestinian state, even though half that state, Gaza, is run by terrorists, Hamas, and the other half, the West Bank, is run by extremists who haven't held an election in 20 years. The Prime Minister was asked about that just today. Gave no serious answer.
Hamas are a terrorist organisation. They should have no role to play in a future Palestinian state.
All very well, Prime Minister, but who's going to stop Hamas from controlling Gaza when you recognise it and shooting its opponents there? If Israel isn't allowed to fight Hamas, which soldiers will be sent to force them out? Ours? Joining me is the country's top foreign affairs writer, Greg Sheridan of the Australian newspaper. Greg, great to see you. Look, as you've written in the Australian, Palestinians have been offered their own state 4 times by Israel. Their leaders have turned them down each time, basically because they want Israel as well. They don't just want their country, they want Israel. So why offer it again now?
Well, Andrew, it's great to be with you and welcome back. The nation has pined and you know, it's been unhappy in your absence. Don't go away again. You've had enough holidays now for the next 10 years. Just forget all about
flattery
it.
Will get you everywhere.
No, look, this business of the Palestinian state, you're absolutely right. It is both absurd and morally repugnant. The Soviet bloc recognised a Palestinian state way back in something like the 1980s or the 1990s, and guess what? No Palestinian state has come about. So that demonstrates the proposition that merely recognising a Palestinian state won't produce one. But it's also morally absurd or morally offensive for 2 reasons. One is it clearly rewards Hamas. Hamas would regard this as a very successful operation now. True, tens of thousands of Gazans have died, but Hamas is quite happy about that. It has isolated Israel more effectively than any previous Palestinian movement has, and it has separated Israel's traditional allies like Britain and Australia from Israel. So it would be as happy as Larry. Now, I think Netanyahu has pursued poor policies in Gaza, morally poor as well as politically poor, but recognising a Palestinian state rewards Hamas. And then finally, it's also morally absurd because a state is recognised when it comes into being. The reason the Palestinians have rejected a state on 4 occasions is because or the mechanism by which they rejected it was to make completely unreasonable demands. So, for example, the right of return, which is that every descendant or relative of any Arab who ever lived in Greater Israel, Gaza or the West Bank has the right to live in Israel proper. That's millions and millions of people. The Palestinians make that demand knowing that no Israeli government from the far left to the right or anywhere else could ever countenance such a proposition. They do that because they don't want to face up to what having their own state would mean. It would mean an end of claims on Israel. It would mean an end of hostility on Israel. It would mean the end of antisemitism in their official teaching. It would almost certainly mean that whoever made that peace agreement would get assassinated by the Islamist extremists whom they've cultivated. It would mean that they would become the enemies of Iran and the other sponsors of Palestinian terrorism. So they are much happier just to have this go on forever and ever and ever in the hope that one day they will demoralise Israel. A lot of Israelis will go and live overseas. They'll have a superior birth rate, the Palestinians, and they'll eventually outnumber the Israelis and so on. So one way that you get to peace in a situation like that is to have decades of normalisation. You convince the recalcitrant side that merely constant refusal won't get them anywhere. Like you had in Northern Ireland, decades of normalisation will lead to peace. You don't get there by these grand gestures, and they are morally obtuse. We've got a war raging in Sudan.
And the only reason I think Hamas would agree now to a Palestinian state it was rejected. Well, the only reason it would agree now to a Palestinian state that was rejected before, because that would allow them to survive this war and stay in control of Gaza. I mean, the whole thing is so preposterous.